If your podcast lives in the same mental category as journaling, content creation, or something I try to stay consistent with, it is never going to produce business level results. It might feel good. It might sound smart. You might even get compliments on it, but it will not reliably educate clients, filter prospects, shorten sales cycles, or generate measurable ROI when you treat it like a creative project. And that's not because podcasting doesn't work. It's because you're running it like a hobby instead of a business asset. Now, I know you've heard that phrasing or something similar before, but today's episode is going to really break that down and tell you what that means, the mistakes you might be making, and how to really truly turn your podcast into this business asset. Today's episode is not full of motivation and better inspiration for your show. We are talking about structure, systems, and CEO level decision making. By the end of this episode, you should be able to look at your podcast and answer clearly and confidently, what role does this show play in my business, and how do I know it's working? You're listening to Podcasting for Financial Professionals, the show where smart business owners learn how to use podcasting as a serious growth tool, not just another marketing experiment. I'm Virginia Elder, podcast strategist and founder of Podcast Abundance. Since 2019, I've helped professionals stop guessing with their podcast and instead build a show that increases their authority, expands reach, and generates leads for their business. If you've ever wondered whether your podcast is actually generating leads or if you're just kind of publishing episodes and hoping for the best, you're not alone. And the issue usually isn't the content. It's that no one ever showed you what to track. Your podcast builds authority, warms leads, expands your reach, and creates opportunities long before someone ever hires you. But if you're only watching download numbers, you're missing most of the ROI. That's why I created the Podcast ROI Metrics Tracker, a free tool that helps you track 50 plus non-traditional metrics so you can finally see what your podcast is really doing for your business. Grab it now at podcastabundance.com/ROI-tracker. All right, let's get into the episode. Most financial professionals don't fail at podcasting because they lack expertise. They fail because they stop at content. They focus on recording the episode, editing the episode, publishing the episode, and then they wonder why nothing else is really happening after that. No new conversations, no warmer prospects, no clearer attribution. This is the moment where podcasting quietly turns into a drain instead of an asset, because content without an operating system is just noise. And the hard truth is this: content creation is the smallest part of podcasting for business. Teeny tiny. The real leverage comes from what happens around the episode and especially after, not during it. When I audit podcasts, especially for experienced professionals, the biggest gap is almost never production quality, even though I know that's what the podcasting world stresses about, right? Like, do I have the best camera? How much is this microphone versus that one? You know, which one captures the best tone in my voice? That stuff is pennies, so minuscule, so minor compared to what really makes a show work. And that component that makes the show work is decision making. Business owners who get real results from podcasting don't ask what they should talk about this week. They ask, what decision do I want a listener to make after this episode? They ask, what belief needs to be shifted before someone's actually ready to work with us? They ask things like, where does this episode send someone next? Like the next step after the episode's over? And what can we do to make that step intentional? These are CEO level thoughts. You've got to stop thinking like a creator who needs ideas and who just wants to talk about this expertise that you have. And instead start thinking like an operator who designs pathways into your business strategically. Your podcast is no longer just content. It becomes infrastructure at that point. Here's a test I use constantly with clients. If your podcast disappeared tomorrow, could you clearly explain what business function it served? Could you identify which conversations would slow down, which opportunities would dry up, or which parts of your pipeline would most see the impact that your show disappeared? If you have no answers, or the answer is no to any of those questions, then your podcast is not yet an asset. Assets do three things. They serve a very specific purpose, they connect to other systems, and they produce signals or metrics that you can track over time. A podcast that functions as a true business asset educates clients before meetings ever happen. It filters out poor fit prospects before they ever book calls and waste your time. It warms up referrals so that conversations start at this high level of trust already, and you don't have that much extra work to do. And your podcast that functions as a true business asset supports email list growth, visibility, and authority in this circular compounding system. If your show isn't doing at least some of those things, the problem is absolutely not your content. It is the lack of a system around it and behind it. This is the part people know intellectually. You've heard it a million times, but you are avoiding it operationally within your business. Podcasting without an email subscriber platform is like hosting events and not having an invite list. Email is not optional if your podcast is meant to convert listeners into buyers. Not because you necessarily want to sell more, you want more revenue, or you're such a selfish person or something, but because you need a place where this relationship can mature and continue and be nurtured. When someone finishes an episode, one of three things happens. They turn off the podcast and forget about you. They decide they love it and they go back to earlier episodes of your show and they binge listen because they are just suddenly, like, at least short term, obsessed. Or if they've already gone through the obsession, found information that they like, and this is just one more episode as part of them being nurtured, your episode has moved them closer to a decision. Email is how you capture that momentum instead of hoping that they listen again next week. Your podcast should not be your entire funnel. I want you to hear that loud and clear. Just podcasting alone for your business, even if you talk about your services, talk about your expertise, I've been doing this for 10 years, whatever. Just podcasting alone does not create a funnel. There is a big, wide disconnect, as big as the Grand Canyon, between your podcast and your business. Email is the connection point between those. It's the little bridge that goes across. Your podcast should be the trust engine that feeds the funnel. So when we talk about having your episode, it really does live out there alone by itself. Your calls to action, the links in your show notes, or resources that you reference during your episode, those are ways that you are directing listeners to your funnel. So the podcast is not the funnel. Your podcast feeds the funnel. Okay? Here's where many absolutely well-intentioned podcast hosts get tripped up. The lead magnet itself is not the strategy, much like the podcast is not the funnel. So imagine podcast episode, you have your call to action to a lead magnet. So maybe that's a video from you or a PDF or a free email course, whatever it is. That lead magnet itself is just the doorway that gets people in. It is not the standalone strategy. There should be a strategy around all of these things, connecting them together. What actually matters is how that doorway, lead magnet, fits into that listener's journey. It matters whether that lead magnet solves a real problem that they're experiencing right now and stressed out and losing sleep over, and whether it prepares them for the next step further into your business that makes sense for them. So when I build strategy sessions, the breakthrough never comes from us designing better content. It comes from the content being aligned with a lead magnet, with a strategy to get people to get that lead magnet or sign up for that lead magnet, an email subscriber platform behind that to deliver nurturing emails. And all along the way, this listener turned subscriber, soon to be client, is being educated and helped and guided by the system, which is also by the podcast host. Every episode reinforces who the show is for, what problem matters most, and what action feels natural next. The call to action doesn't interrupt the episode. It completes it. It is a natural next step where if I found and loved this episode and want more, here's where I go. This is another hidden rule. Not every episode is meant to convert. Not every episode is meant to educate deeply. And not every episode, especially, is meant to grow downloads or attract new listeners. Some episodes intentionally need to exist to calm existing clients, to pre-answer objections that you've been hearing fairly often in your sales calls, to establish you as the authority specifically for people in their situation, to support referrals, to train your audience how to approach the problem that you solve and how to think, maybe like mindset shifts, really. When you expect every single episode to perform, whether that is new email subscribers, larger download numbers, sales off of the episode, You're creating pressure on yourself when you're thinking just about that performance piece. But when you assign roles to these episodes strategically, you're creating leverage. So again, creating the podcast as an asset and creating specific episodes to leverage that podcast as a whole to grow your business. This is how you move from random publishing and random topics and what am I going to talk about this week to intentional sequencing of episodes. The highest performing professional podcasts that I work with don't succeed just because the host is more charismatic or more creative or better looking or whatever. They succeed because the show is designed that way. Decisions are batched, not just the recording process, like everything along the podcasting process gets batched. Ideas are reused intentionally across formats. The host knows which episodes support growth, which ones deepen trust, which ones establish authority, going down the list. And success is measured by listener behavior, like how many downloaded the lead magnet, how much did the email list grow, what are the open rates of these email lists. We're talking link clicks, use of various tools that may be in your show notes showing the attribution links. And we're looking really truly at listener behavior and the traction we're getting from intentionally structured episodes, not vanity metrics like your YouTube subscriber number and how many followers or downloads, or this episode spiked this week because I had on this celebrity guest. No. The most successful personal finance shows do not rely on inspiration or motivation or celebrity guests or anything like that. They rely on systems. And sometimes it takes a while for the host to have the capacity to implement all of the systems I'm going to recommend. But in time, that's how we grow, right? Like this quarter, implement this thing. This quarter, change this other thing. One step at a time as we mature as podcast hosts, myself included. That is how we're going to grow and continue to tweak the podcast as a business asset. Now, let's talk about burnout for a minute. That is, yet another really, really common term that we hear in any content creation space. Now, burnout when it comes to podcasting does not happen because podcasting is hard. It's not hard to sit down behind a microphone and jabber, okay? Burnout happens in the podcasting space because there's no operating plan for the podcast. And that is often disguised by saying, I'm just frustrated with it, and I'm not getting clients from my show. Or I just feel like I should have more traction by now. Or I've been doing it for 4 months and I haven't gotten a client yet. Something similar to that phrasing. Maybe your phrase would be slightly different, but it's on the same page. So when your show depends on last minute recordings, you having the emotional energy today to be able to record, you needing to come up with your topic almost on the fly, or even not having a structure, like I said earlier, where some episodes are education, some are meant to attract new people, some calm existing clients, like maybe the stock market did something wild and you need to put out an episode that says like, hey folks, remember this is a long-term thing, like we're not going to panic. Right? Pre-answering objections, establishing authority, supporting referrals, all of these like intentional, purposeful episodes. So if you don't have that structure behind it, yes, that's where burnout shows up. The show itself is going to collapse the moment real life intervenes because you aren't going to record today when you have an episode that's due tomorrow, right? A real business asset survives sick days for yourself, sick kids, an assistant that didn't show up today, an assistant that gets fired, vacations, busy seasons, low motivation, just any quote unquote excuse to not record an episode because you're too stressed, too busy, overwhelmed, whatever it is. But any of those issues, your show will survive when there are systems and plans and batching behind it with the intention of it becoming a business asset. That's the standard for your podcast. Now, let's talk about some questions, or the question that you should really be asking yourself when it comes to your podcast. The real question is not, how do I make my podcast better? The question is, what job does this podcast do for my business? And how do I know it's doing that job? Once you can answer that, everything else becomes more clear. What to publish, how often to publish, what to track, what to delegate, all of the most commonly asked questions that I get become 1,000 times more clear when we know what job your podcast is doing or is intended to do for your business. And then we have metrics that show us whether or not that podcast is in fact doing that job. And that is when podcasting stops feeling heavy and starts feeling like yet another machine in the background of our business. It starts working with your business instead of competing with it. If your podcast feels like effort without evidence, that is absolutely not a personal failure on your part. It is a systems problem. It is a strategic problem. And systems and strategy can be designed. Podcasting works exceptionally well for financial professionals, not because it's trendy, but because it's building compounding trust with every single episode, but only when you run it like it's a long-term business asset. And again, I'm going to emphasize, not a creative project, not a content creation machine, not a fun way to air out some laundry, nothing like that. It has to be treated like a business asset, which maybe just in that you're feeling a little pressure because that makes you think, oh, well, then it has to look perfect. And no, again, it's not about the look. It's not about the mic or the camera or your positioning within your office or your boardroom. It is about the strategic, intentional creation of the systems around and behind, and especially after every podcast episode gets aired. If you want the next steps after this episode, the right move is not more content, in case that wasn't clear. The right move is going to be a strategic approach to your show. Our strategy sessions change everything for my clients, and I would love to do that with you too. Thanks for being here today. I look forward to hearing about the strategic moves you made as a result of this episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Financial Professionals. Before you go, make sure you're actually measuring what your podcast is producing. Not by vibes, not by download spikes, but by the actual outcomes it's creating. Authority, visibility, and leads for your business. Your podcast is doing more than you think. You just need a way to see it. That's why I created the Podcast ROI Metrics Tracker, a free tool that helps you track the real return your podcasting for business is creating. From authority and visibility to leads and opportunities across many categories. Download it right now at podcastabundance.com/ROI-tracker.